Rain drizzled over the glimmering skyline of New York City, painting streaks of gold and silver on the billionaire's glass office. Alexander Hayes stood before the window, untouched coffee in hand, staring down at the people far below. To them, he was a myth, the youngest self-made CEO of Hayes Industries, the man whose signature could shift markets overnight. But power, he'd learned, was a lonely kingdom. That morning, a headline blinked on his phone. Hayes Industries faces employee backlash. Workers claim CEO out of touch. He exhaled slowly. Out of touch, they weren't wrong. He hadn't spoken to a regular employee in years. His world was meetings, mergers, and fake smiles. The laughter in his office halls was bought, not born. Later that night, he made a decision that would alter his life forever. No press, no PR stunt, just a plain gray hoodie, an old car borrowed from the company garage, and a new name, Alex Hartman. A week later, Alex was standing outside one of his own distribution centers in Brooklyn, pretending to be a new hire. The place smelled of grease, cardboard, and ambition. The manager handed him a uniform and a worn badge that read temporary worker. "Welcome to the real world, kid," the manager said with a half smile. Alex smiled back, a strange thrill sparking inside him. For the first time in years, no one bowed, no one cared who he was. He was invisible and free. The work was hard, repetitive, and humbling. Boxes, sweat, and the sound of forklifts became his new symphony. But amidst the chaos, something, or rather someone, caught his attention. Her name was Lila Monroe. She was nothing like the women he knew from galas and boardrooms. She had quiet eyes that carried both exhaustion and fire. She was kind, yet she moved like someone who had fought too many battles alone. She laughed easily, worked harder than anyone, and somehow made even the dullest shifts bearable. One evening, during their break, he found her sitting on a stack of crates, staring at the sunset through a cracked window. "Tough day?" he asked, sitting beside her. She smiled faintly. "Aren't they all?" Her voice had warmth, the kind that made him forget who he was supposed to be. They began talking every day. Lila told him about her younger brother, her mother's medical bills, and how she dreamed of starting her own small bakery someday. She never complained, though her life seemed an uphill battle. One night, when the rain returned, the power went out in the warehouse. Workers grumbled and left early, but Lila stayed behind to finish her shift. Alex offered to help. Together, they packed boxes under the dim light of emergency lamps, laughing over silly jokes and shared stories. At one point, their hands brushed, and in that electric moment, something changed. For a man who had everything, Alex felt a rush he hadn't known in years. Not desire, connection, but reality was a cruel shadow. Every smile he shared with her came with guilt. He wasn't Alex Hartman. He was Alexander Hayes, the billionaire she probably blamed for every pay cut, every unpaid overtime hour. If she knew the truth, would she ever forgive him? Days turned into weeks. Lila grew to trust him, even confide in him. She told him once, without realizing who she spoke to, that she hated the company's leadership. "They don't care about us," she said bitterly one lunch break. "We're numbers to them. Machines." He felt that sting deep in his chest. That night, he couldn't sleep. Her words echoed inside him. They don't care about us. Maybe, for once, he needed to do something that wasn't about profit or image. The next morning, he made an unexpected decision. He would change the company from the inside out, but first, he needed to know more, to understand her world completely. So he continued the charade, working, sweating, earning every dollar. He saw how broken the system was, how overlooked the people were who actually kept his empire alive. And each day, his respect for Lila and for them grew deeper. One weekend, Lila invited him to a small community dinner for workers and their families. He hesitated but went anyway. It was nothing fancy. Plastic tables, home-cooked food, laughter echoing off the walls. Yet he felt more at peace there than at any luxury gala he'd ever attended. When Lila's little brother came up to him and asked, "Are you going to be my sister's boyfriend?" the room burst into laughter. Alex felt his cheeks warm, but when he looked at Lila, he saw her blush too. Something was happening between them. something real. But the longer he stayed, the heavier the truth became. Then came the day everything changed. A surprise visit. The real CEO, Alexander Hayes, was scheduled to tour the facility. Reporters, security, and executives filled the building. Everyone buzzed with excitement. Lila was among those preparing for the visit, cursing under her breath about how fake it all was. And Alex had no choice but to disappear. He hid in the locker room, heart pounding. If anyone recognized him, if Lila saw him in that suit, everything would shatter. But fate, as always, had its own script, because just as he turned to leave to the back exit, the door opened, and there she was, Lila, frozen, eyes wide. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "Alex, what are you wearing?" He turned slowly, the suit and badge giving away everything. The warehouse air thickened, the world holding its breath as the truth hovered between them. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The sound of the rain outside filled the silence, tapping gently against the glass like the faint ticking of a clock, counting down to disaster. Lila's gaze flicked from his tailored suit to the company badge clipped to his jacket, the one that read Alexander Hayes, CEO. Her lips parted, but no words came out. "Lila," he began softly, his voice strained, "I can explain." "Explain," she cut him off, her tone sharper than he'd ever heard it. "You lied to me, Alex. Or should I say Mr. Hayes?" Her voice cracked on his name, and that hurt more than the anger. He took a step forward. "Please, let me." "Don't," she said, stepping back. "Just don't." Her eyes glistened, but she held herself tall. "Was this some kind of game to you? Pretend to be one of us? See how the poor workers live for a week before returning to your penthouse?" He flinched. "No, it wasn't like that." "Then what was it?" He hesitated. The truth tangled inside him. "I wanted to understand. I wanted to know what it felt like, to actually live in the world my company built. I needed to see what I'd become blind to." She laughed bitterly. "And you chose me for your experiment?" His heart twisted. "No, Lila, I didn't choose you. I found you." For a flicker of a second, her anger faltered, but the pain in her eyes remained. "You think that makes it better?" she whispered. "You walked into my life with a fake name, a fake story. You listened to me talk about how hard it is to survive under your company's policies, and you said nothing. You let me trust you." Every word hit him like a hammer. "I didn't mean to hurt you," he said quietly. I didn't expect to care this much." She stared at him, breathing unevenly. "You cared." "Yes," he said, his voice almost breaking. "More than I ever thought I could." Lila looked away, crossing her arms as if to shield herself. "You have everything, Alexander. Power, money, control. And yet, you came here pretending to be one of us, to feel something real for once. But for us, this isn't escape. This is our life." Her words pierced through the last layer of his defenses. He'd spent his whole life building walls, around his heart, his company, his image. But in front of her, those walls were nothing but ruins. "I know," he whispered, "and that's why I can't go back to pretending anymore." She looked at him then, confusion flickering in her expression. "What do you mean?" "I'm going to change things," he said. "The wages, the hours, the way people are treated. It's all going to be different." She let out a quiet, disbelieving laugh. "You think one speech will fix everything?" "No," he admitted, "but it's a start, and I want to start with you." The sincerity in his tone softened something in her, but not enough. She shook her head slowly. "You can't just fix this with good intentions. You broke my trust." "I'll earn it back," he said simply. "How?" He didn't have an answer, not one that could convince her. All he could offer was honesty, raw and unguarded. "By showing you that the man you met, Alex Hartman, wasn't a lie. He was me, without the title, without the walls. That's who I want to be again." Her eyes met his, torn between anger and something deeper. The memory of every laugh, every moment they'd shared when he wasn't a billionaire, but just a man. Before she could reply, voices echoed down the hall, the board members searching for him. He glanced toward the door. "Lila, I have to go," he said. "But please don't decide yet. Just give me a chance to prove I meant every word. He left before she could respond, the sound of her silence chasing him down the corridor. That night, the city looked different from his penthouse. The lights below didn't sparkle. They burned. Every window, every streetlight, every neon sign was a reminder of the world he had tried to understand but had only begun to glimpse. He poured himself a drink but didn't touch it. All he could see was Lila's face. Hurt, betrayed, but alive with the same fire that had drawn him in from the start. Over the next few days, he dove into work like never before, but not the kind his board expected. He began ordering internal reviews, demanding reports on worker treatment, pay disparities, and facility safety. The executives whispered that their CEO had lost his mind. Maybe he had. He replaced half the management team, introduced new welfare programs, and tripled safety budgets. But none of it mattered, not yet. Not until he could look Lila in the eye and show her that it was real. Weeks passed. She didn't answer his messages. Then one morning, a small envelope arrived on his desk. It had no sender, only his name in neat handwriting. Inside was a single note. Change isn't a promise. It's proof. El asterisk. He smiled faintly. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a door. He visited the Brooklyn facility again, this time as himself, no disguise. The workers watched with wary curiosity. Rumors had spread about new benefits, paid overtime, better health coverage. For the first time, they weren't afraid of him. And then he saw her. Lila was by the loading bay, clipboard in hand. When she looked up and saw him, she froze, then returned to her work as if he weren't there. He approached quietly. "You're still here," he said softly. "Someone has to make sure your big promises don't fall apart." She replied without looking at him. He smiled. "Then I'm glad it's you." She finally turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "You've changed things. People are talking about it. They say you're different now." "I'm trying to be," he said. "And is that because of guilt or because of me?" He hesitated. "Both," he admitted. "But mostly because of what I learned from you." For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she sighed, her shoulders relaxing slightly. "You still have a lot to prove, Mr. Hayes." "Then let me start today," he said, his tone quiet but steady. "Not as Mr. Hayes, as Alex." Her eyes flicked to his, searching for something, sincerity, regret, hope. Whatever she saw made her lips part in the faintest, reluctant smile. "All right, Alex," she said finally. "You can start by helping unload those boxes. We're short-staffed." He laughed softly, rolling up his sleeves. Just like old times. They worked side by side again, this time without lies. The silence between them was heavy, but not hostile. Slowly, conversation returned, light at first, cautious. And somewhere between the laughter and the ache of what had been broken, something began to rebuild. That night, after everyone left, they found themselves again by the same cracked window where it had all begun, the city lights glowing through the drizzle. Lila looked out at the skyline. "You really think people like you can change?" He turned to her, his voice low. "I don't know, but I know people like you can make people like me want to." She didn't reply, but her silence wasn't cold anymore. And when the rain started to fall again, neither of them moved away. The world outside continued its rhythm, a blend of chaos and calm, as if holding its breath for what might come next. The rain had stopped hours ago, but the city still glistened, as if the storm had left behind its memory in droplets and reflections. Alexander Hayes, once untouchable, once admired only through headlines, now stood on the same cracked concrete floor where his greatest lie had begun. Only now, there was no disguise, no pretense. Just a man and the woman who had unknowingly changed the course of his life. The air between them hummed with all the words left unspoken. Lila's arms were crossed loosely, not in defiance this time, but in quiet defense, a heart still unsure. The hum of the machines had faded. The warehouse was nearly empty. Outside, the sky was soft and silver. "You know," she said finally, "when you first showed up here as Alex Hartman, I thought you were just another lost soul trying to make ends meet. You were terrible at packing boxes." He laughed, surprised. "I was, wasn't I?" "You were," she said, her lips curling into a faint smile. "But You listened. You noticed people. You cared. That's what made you different. That's what made me. She stopped, catching herself before finishing the sentence. He stepped closer, his voice gentle. Made you what? She looked up at him, eyes steady now. Made me believe you were real. He exhaled, the weight of her words pressing against him like gravity. I was real, Lila. Every word, every moment we shared. It was the first time in my life I felt like I was actually living. You showed me that. She shook her head softly. You can't build something real on a lie. Maybe not, he said quietly, but you can rebuild it on truth. Silence stretched between them again, but it wasn't uncomfortable this time. The world outside had quieted, as if waiting to see what they'd choose next. Why me? She asked suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. Out of everyone you could have met, why me? He hesitated before answering, his gaze unwavering. Because you never treated me like I was anyone special. You didn't want anything from me. Not my money, not my name. You saw me as a man when I'd forgotten how to be one. Her eyes softened, though she tried to hide it. And what happens now? You can't exactly live in two worlds forever. You belong up there. She pointed toward the skyline glowing to the high windows. Not here with us. I used to think that, he said. But maybe that's a problem. Maybe I don't belong up there anymore. Not if it means losing everything that made me human. She studied him, trying to decide if this was another performance. But the sincerity in his tone, the exhaustion in his eyes, told her this was no act. This was a man stripped bare of his armor, offering her something fragile and real. He took another step closer. I can't change the past, but I can change what comes after. Not because it's good for business, but because it's the right thing to do. And if you'll let me, I'd like to prove that to you. For a long time, Lila said nothing. Then, with a slow breath, she turned toward the window. You really mean that? I've never meant anything more, he replied. The light from the city shimmered on her face, and in that glow, he saw something shift. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the fragile beginning of it. Over the month that followed, the world began to notice. Hayes Industries transformed from a symbol of ruthless capitalism into a story of redemption. New programs for workers spread across every branch. Scholarships, housing assistance, medical aid. The press called the Hayes Reform. Investors called it madness. But the people? They called it hope. For the first time, Alexander didn't care about the board's skepticism or the headlines that doubted his intentions. He wasn't chasing numbers anymore. He was chasing meaning. And through it all, Lila remained at the heart of it. Not as a romantic fantasy, but as the moral compass he'd nearly lost. She continued working at the facility, now promoted to community liaison, connecting management to employees. She was respected, admired, yet she never let the attention get to her. Every morning, he'd find reasons to visit her branch, some official, some not. Their conversations grew easier again, filled with laughter and teasing. But underneath, a tension lingered, a quiet, magnetic pull neither could ignore. One evening, months later, the company hosted its first charity gala. Not in a grand hotel, but in the same warehouse where everything had started. The walls were strung with lights, the air filled with the hum of laughter and music. Workers and executives mingled freely, a sight that would have been impossible a year ago. Lila stood near the entrance, dressed simply but elegantly, a soft glow in her eyes. She had been part of every step of the reform, and though she didn't seek credit, everyone knew the truth. Without her, none of it would have happened. When Alexander entered, the room quieted slightly, then erupted in applause. He looked around at the faces, real faces, familiar faces, and felt something stir in his chest. Pride, yes, but also gratitude. His gaze found Lila's across the room. She smiled, small, knowing, guarded, and he smiled back. Later that night, as the crowd began to thin, he found her standing near the old loading bay, looking out at the skyline, the same spot where they had once argued, once confessed, once broken apart. He approached quietly. You always find your way to this window, he said softly. It's where it all started, she replied, and where everything changed. He nodded, stepping beside her. I used to look at the city and only see profits, numbers, markets. But now I see people, dreams, struggles, all the things I was blind to before. That's because you finally started listening, she said, turning toward him. Not just hearing, really listening. He met her gaze. To you, mostly. A small laugh escaped her. You always did know what to say. He smiled faintly. I'm still learning what to mean. For a moment, neither spoke. The music from inside faded into the distance. All that remained was the hum of the city and the quiet rhythm of their breathing. I was afraid to forgive you, she admitted finally, because I thought if I did, it would make what you did okay. But it doesn't. It just means I'm ready to stop holding on to the anger. He swallowed, his voice barely audible. Does that mean there's a chance for us? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped closer, close enough for him to feel the warmth of her presence. There's a chance, she said softly. But this time, no lies, no masks, just you. He nodded, emotion flickering across his face. Just me? And then, under the quiet shimmer of city lights, she reached out and took his hand. Not in forgiveness, not in surrender, but in understanding. It was the simplest gesture, yet it felt like the most powerful thing in the world. Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall, soft and slow, blanketing the city in white. The world seemed to pause, as if giving them this moment. Two souls were collided in the chaos of deception, finding peace in the truth. In the days that followed, their story spread, not as a tabloid romance, but as a legend whispered in boardrooms and break rooms alike. Asterisk, the billionaire who went undercover and found his humanity, the woman who taught him what power really meant. Asterisk. But for Alexander and Lila, it wasn't about the world's fascination. It was about the life they were quietly building, one rooted not in money, but in meaning. Sometimes, he still worked late in his office, the city lights reflecting off the glass walls. But now, when he looked down at the streets below, he didn't see strangers anymore. He saw people whose names he knew, whose dreams he helped protect. And sometimes, when Lila stopped by his office after work, bringing the smell of fresh bread from her small bakery, the dream she had finally made real with his help, they would sit together in silence, watching the same skyline that had once separated them. Do you ever miss it? She'd ask. The old life, the parties, the power, the pretending? He'd shake his head, eyes soft. Not for a second, because I finally learned something money can't buy. What's that? She'd ask, though she already knew. He'd turn to her, his smile quiet but certain. Peace. Outside, the city would hum with its endless rhythm, millions of stories unfolding at once. But for him, everything he'd been searching for, love, redemption, truth, was right there in the woman beside him, in the life they rebuilt from the wreckage of his mistakes. And as the snow kept falling over the glowing skyline, Alexander Hayes, the billionaire once lost behind his empire, finally understood the irony of his own story. In disguising himself to find love among the ordinary, he had uncovered the most extraordinary truth of all, that the greatest wealth a man can ever earn is the kind that cannot be measured in numbers, only in hearts that choose to see him for who he truly is. And though the world would remember his story as the billionaire in disguise, he knew that behind every disguise there was only one truth left. He was no longer the man who searched for love. He was a man who found it and finally learned how to deserve it.